I think the thing about leadership is that people hear what we do far louder than they hear what we say. For example, I hear leaders that talk about having a commitment or a belief in health and well-being. If you say that and yet you sit in your office eating donuts and avoiding exercise, the people that follow you know that you are not serious about health and well-being. Right? Our behavior, our actions are critically important. But there are times, and I think there are some times when the words we use are even more critically important. And so today I want to talk about three particular phrases. And they're three phrases that I think great leaders use, and they're not afraid to use, that differentiate them from the rest. And some of them are going to hurt a little bit maybe as I share them. The first one is, I was wrong. We all love to win. Right? Being right feels like winning. That's why we spend so much time trying to avoid having to admit being wrong, especially at home. Right? Because that feels like losing. A number of years ago, when I was working at a large organization, we were in the process of replacing our major software system that we used to run our business. And this was a big, big deal for us. I mean, massive year-long implementation, ton of money going to be sunk into this, and we had really sold this to the organization as being critical to our future, strategically important. But as the implementation team got into it, they got a couple months down the road, they started to identify some really key issues. They started to notice some big problems, and they started to send a flag up that maybe this wasn't the right answer. I will never forget the day that our CEO stood up in front of our leadership team and said, "We're pulling the plug on this." And he stood in front of us and said, took full responsibility and said, in hindsight, this was a bad decision. I was wrong. We made a mistake. He laid out what had happened, why, and then he talked about what we were going to do next. Great example of a leader owning a mistake. And here's the thing for us as leaders that we forget is that oftentimes the people who we lead know that we've made a mistake long before we do. Right? They're just waiting to see if we're going to admit it and do something about it. When you admit a mistake and take action to correct it, it builds confidence. It means that they can wholeheartedly now follow you because they know if you do screw up, if you make a mistake, you're not going to march them off the edge of a cliff in some misguided attempt at avoiding having to say you're wrong. Right? So that's number one. Number two thing you hear great leaders say, I'm sorry. 1982, 7 people died in Chicago after ingesting Tylenol that had been laced with cyanide. James Burke, the then CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the company that sold Tylenol, immediately and publicly got out in front of this and apologized and took full responsibility for this tragedy. Despite the fact that later it was shown that the perpetrator of this crime had absolutely no connection with Johnson & Johnson. The company went on to apologize to all of their customers. They told them not to take their product. And then they did something at the time that was completely unheard of. They recalled every bit of Tylenol in the country. Cost them something like $100 million in 1982. Most people wrote off Tylenol as being dead. They figured that was the end. But 2 months later, the product was back on the shelf with new tamper-resistant packaging. And within a year, Tylenol sales had returned to 80% of its sales rate prior to the tragedy, largely because of how this was handled. Leadership apologized, got out ahead of it, made it right. When we make mistakes, and we do make mistakes, every single one of us, a timely and heartfelt apology can go a long ways towards building trust, building confidence, and proving to our people that we care. Can turn something really tragic into potentially something positive. The third one, and this is going to be really hard for you to swallow, is I don't know. As leaders, I think it's really tempting to think that our job is to have all the answers. It starts when we get promoted to our first management job. Do you remember this? You get promoted to your first management job and something magical happens. When you walk into a room at your organization full of people or you have a meeting, when a question is posed, people look at you. And this power is intoxicating. It's awesome, right? And maybe you start giving an answer because you're smart. That's how you got promoted, and people seem to want that from you. And pretty soon you start to buy into the fact that giving answers is how I create value as a manager, as a leader. But despite what signals you're getting, our role as a leader is not to have all the answers. We don't have to have all the answers. When we are willing to admit we don't have all the answers, when we're willing to admit that we don't know, that makes room for the talent around us to step up, to contribute their expertise and creativity and knowledge to create solutions that we couldn't possibly imagine. So let's recap. I don't know. I am sorry, and I was wrong. This is what vulnerability sounds like. This is what vulnerability feels like. And I think a lot of us bought into an idea that being in leadership is about not having any vulnerability, not showing any vulnerability. We were sold kind of a bill of goods, I think, that not having any flaws or not showing any flaws or weaknesses was part of how we become an effective leader. But here's the bad news. We are all flawed. Some of us more than others, let's be honest. We all make mistakes. We all have weaknesses. And the people who we lead, especially the people that are closest to us, are painfully aware of our flaws and our weaknesses. Right? And so being willing to be vulnerable is important. So I want to leave you with a public service announcement. And this is maybe more of a reminder for you. And that is, we live in a culture now where to survive, we have all developed finely tuned BS machines. Right? We can see it. We recognize authenticity when we see it and we crave it. And when we hear BS, we know it and we dismiss it. So we aren't looking for, and we won't follow leaders who want to pretend they don't have any weaknesses. We are seeking and craving leaders who can put their vulnerabilities on display, share that with us, and then have the courage to lead through that. Be that kind of leader. We need you. Thank you.